Hello and welcome to the EWRB Beyond Mandatory Benchmarking webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Healy Lev and I'm the CRO here at Gobi. The session today will be recorded and sent to all participants on today's call. It will also be available on our website. Our session will run about 45 minutes in length, and of course we've left time at the end of the presentation for your questions. Please feel free to use the chat feature to submit any questions during the presentation. In this webinar, we will be discussing Ontario's mandatory energy and water benchmarking ordinance, how mandatory benchmarking can fuel your overall performance, and how you can take your data beyond benchmarking. I'd now like to introduce our presenters. Bala Ganam is the VP of Environment and Strategic Partnerships at BOMA Toronto. Myself, Healy Lev, Chief Revenue Officer at Gobi. Robert Smith, Vice President of Consulting at Greensoil with a long-standing history as the Head of Sustainability at Minto. Neil Pegram, Director of Americas with GRES and formerly in a similar role to Rob with Morguard. So wealth of expertise and knowledge on this panel today, and excited to have you guys here. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Bala.
Thank you, Haley. Fine. There you go. Thank you, Kelly, and also the Gobi team for giving Bomatron an opportunity to present. So I will cover the overview of the Ontario Energy and Water Reporting Benchmarking Regulation, or commonly known as OREG 2017. So Bomatron was looped into the discussion back in 2014 when it was just the it was proposed as a City of Toronto bylaw requiring buildings to report, and then because our members have own and operate buildings all across the province, we kind of pushed for this becoming a provincial initiatives, and then since then there have been a number of stakeholder sessions, both at the provincial level, city level, and also we had a number of internal stakeholding as well. So I'll just get right into the sorry. There you go. Thank you. So finally, the regulation was enacted early February 2017, and under this regulation, building owners of commercial, industrial, multi-unit residential, and other buildings that are 50,000 square feet or larger are required to report their buildings' energy, water, and also greenhouse gas emission annually to the Ministry of Energy. And some of this reported information will be disclosed publicly as it's stated in the OREG 2017. And what it meant to achieve is it supports conservation first framework under the 2013 long-term energy plan, as well as the broader 2016 Ontario Climate Change Action Plan. So the goals of the regulation are meant to, it's threefold. One is it's meant to provide a greater energy awareness and literacy amongst large building owners. Now it says large building owners, but actually, you know, when you think about it, 50,000 square foot buildings, it actually kind of falls on the small buildings. And also it motivates the owners and managers to reduce energy, water use, and thus reducing the greenhouse emission. And also it provides information gathered through this regulation would allow the ministry and the cities and municipalities come up with a better policies and programs that fit the needs of the industry, rather than some program that could, as we all experience with programs that really doesn't meet our what the industry needs. So in terms of the number of buildings that's involved, we're looking at close to 18,000 buildings across 12,000 unique ownership. And the reporting will be phased in over 3 years, because we understand that the really large buildings, which are 250,000 square feet or larger, they've already reported their numbers through Energy Star portfolio managers. So for them, this regulation, the main is that as long as it doesn't create any administrative or financial burden, this is a business as usual for them. But where the challenge will be are when you're hitting that 50,000 square feet threshold. So because of that reason, we needed some time to prepare the industry for the reporting. So that's why we strongly recommended that it be phased in over 3 years. So the most building owners captured under the regulation are not currently benchmarked. Now, these are the medium to small buildings because the true large buildings, the 250,000 square feet and larger, when you look at the total number of buildings, they constitute fairly a small portion. And also the phase-in approach would also allow the province and the various stakeholders to provide special training and education materials, and as well as individual assistance to prepare for the reporting. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, you're looking at the actual phase-out schedule. So the first reporting deadline would be July 1st, 2018 this year, and that's for buildings 250,000 square feet or larger. And year 2 would be July 1st, 2019. That's for 100,000 square feet buildings and larger. And then the third and final year would be 50,000 square feet. And it's also during that phase, we'll be phasing in the multi-residential buildings as well, because in the first year of reporting, the multi-unit residential buildings are not required to report. And one of the things that we encourage the owners in Ontario to do is actually go to the provincial website and input your contact information. This is the main method by which the province will reach out to the owners with respect to regulation. Of course, they'll be working through with organizations such as BOMA as well, but they want to make sure they capture the main contact details for the buildings. And two things to do even prior to you doing that: you need to call the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, the Impact, to get your Impact roll number, and also you need to call the ministry to get your EWRB ID. Those are the two key pieces of information that will let the ministry know that they have the right person in the building. So here are some important information. So to get the full details of the regulation itself, follow the link that's provided. And then same thing with the guidelines and any sort of training information. Ministry will be providing some, NRCan will be providing some training on portfolio manager, as well as any number of stakeholders that are involved in the program. So the contact details are given there. So that kind of brings my piece to end. If you have any questions, you can always call me directly, or I would urge you to follow these contact details. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Bala, if you don't mind to advance the slides, I think we will be moving on to Rob's take on the EWRB program. So Rob, without further ado, all you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm excited to present today. So let's get started. So one of the biggest challenges with energy efficient buildings is that they can be almost invisible to the marketplace. Another challenge is the comparison of energy performance across multiple assets. So two buildings side by side, it is a challenge to figure out what the performance is from each building because they probably look the same from the exterior. And the market dictates that it's an important factor for those who invest, purchase, lease, or even rent. Consumers are familiar with energy efficiency labels such as Energy Star on major appliances. But knowing or finding Energy Star scores and certifications for buildings is a daunting task. Some municipalities are taking steps to overcome this barrier. We have seen numerous cities in the U.S. adopt policies where building owners are required to report on annual energy water consumption. And as Bala has indicated, now has come to Ontario. The reporting is available to the general public on the municipality website, allowing potential occupants to pre-screen building space utility performance before entering into a lease, etc. It also encourages building owners to implement energy water reduction strategies to better position their assets on the market. Large cities are or have adopted aggressive climate energy reduction targets, with commercial and multifamily buildings accounting for up to 75% of emissions in cities. There is a growing trend to implement reduction strategies. Local utilities and government agencies are providing incentives and grants to allow building owners to reduce capital expenditures and generate reasonable returns on investment. As an example, since 2010, large assets in New York City continue to reduce emissions. A data capture of 4,229 benchmark buildings have reduced their overall energy use by 10% and greenhouse gas emissions by almost 14%. And if you look on the slide, you can see in yellow is the energy reduction, and in purple will be the greenhouse gas emission reductions. And those are my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. So just a moment of reminiscing before I get into my section. I do remember, Bala, you and I met a couple years back when there was a delegation from Ontario and some folks from Toronto coming down to Chicago to kind of talk with the folks in Chicago who had implemented the ordinance, and I think you guys studied a couple other cities as well. So just, a sidebar that a lot of thought and preparation goes into these ordinances, and they're very grassroots at this juncture. So there's around 30 of them, but everyone really grows. It's homegrown, if you will, from each municipality or province or city or whoever is putting out the ordinance. So there's collaboration between the different markets and folks that have done ordinances. So it's been fun for me to see you guys kind of go from the phase of planning to seeing it come to fruition, and of course have high hopes of it being extremely successful.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, for us, I was just going to say, for us, it was mainly a case of making sure that we learn from the mistakes of other jurisdictions. So I guess every subsequent jurisdictions where this kind of policy is implemented, I guess the broader objective is to kind of make it easier and more practical as possible. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have come a long way, and it's an exciting year, certainly from our standpoint, and I'm sure from yours. So I'm going to talk a bit about more of the details and just the logistics of how we go about it. So as I mentioned, a lot of planning has gone into putting together this ordinance, a lot of thought, a lot of research, a big team of brilliant minds from Toronto and Ontario. So what does it mean now to the folks, the building owners who actually have to do something? So key metrics to know and think about: 12 months of data. So we're looking at, a year in arrears of the last 12 months of performance. So if you have less than that, it's not really meaningful data. Need to have the full year. Basic building information and attributes. So of course, you don't want to compare, a 5,000 square meter office building that was built in 1995 with a warehouse from 1950 that's 10 times the size. So you have basic building information, so you're benchmarked against buildings of similar vintage and function. And then each of the local requirements is slightly different. So Bala talked about the staggered approach with multifamily being a year in arrears. That's kind of common, and then different square footages. But every municipality kind of has their own flavor, if you will. But there's a lot of similarities. So a couple ways to do it. Certainly you can do it yourself. So a lot of folks probably on the line have fairly large in-house teams. I think, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but your team at Minto, when you were leading the sustainability team there, was like 10 people full-time, something like that?
Yeah, so there was actually 16 of us.
16, okay. So if you're lucky, like Rob back in the day, who had a 16-person, energy sustainability team, perhaps you do it yourself. So you look up the requirements, you figure out how it needs to be reported, you get acclimated with the Energy Star Portfolio Manager interface, and you do it yourself. A lot of other folks and clients that we work with don't even have one dedicated person. If they're lucky, they might have a director of sustainability who's one FTE that's focused on these types of initiatives. But in most cases, or in a lot of cases, it's the head of asset management who in their spare time wears the hat of sustainability, or the head of property management who in their spare time wears the hat of sustainability, or the CFO, or whoever it might be. So thinking about just resources and highest and best use of people's time. Appoint a team member. So if you don't have a dedicated sustainability person or team, as I just mentioned, you can have one person designated as that. Or a third party like Gobi can come in and help you. And sometimes this has to do with the size of your team and bandwidth, but sometimes it has to do with the complexity and sheer number of assets. So one client that we work with, they have 1,300 assets. So even though they have an in-house small team, with 1,300 assets, you're going to need to leverage a data partner, a technology, or a third-party consultant to get it done successfully and really move the needle. So there's some challenges with benchmarking at the building level, certainly, and let's talk about those. So in order to accurately benchmark, you have to collect data, right? So that can be difficult because you talk to the property manager who's busy with leasing and keeping tenants happy, and the last thing they want to do is compile a bunch of utility data, or perhaps it's the chief engineer who says, I've been running this building for the last 25 years, no one's ever cared about utility information, and now you're all up in my business, and they can get a little territorial. So it's just the personalities that you're working with, and then helping them understand why we're doing this. It's not to create extra work. It's not, I don't think that the province has, thoughts of being big brother or looking over anyone's shoulder or checking their work. It's understanding that the ordinance has good intentions, and understanding what is needed to be done and what's the quickest and easiest way to get the information we need in a streamlined path. That's kind of at the asset level. At the portfolio level, various challenges. So perhaps within your portfolio, you have assets in the United States and Canada, or in Europe and abroad, and all of the requirements are different. So even within the United States, and now with the new ordinance in Ontario, the dates are different. Some of them are due in May. Some of them are due in June. Some of them require a certified energy manager or licensed professional engineer to verify the data. So keeping track of all that can be challenging. The deadlines change. So California is a good example where they released one a couple of years back. Then they kind of took it back. It was under criticism, so they took it back, and there was a year where there wasn't one. Now they're supposed to publish a new one. So even just managing and the knowledge of how you find that out, you have to do a lot of research and keep your finger, the pulse on a lot of different things. So a lot of different variables there to track. And again, depending on the size of your portfolio. If you have 20 buildings, maybe manageable. If you have 300 buildings, maybe not within, an in-house team. Different asset classes. So collecting information in a commercial office building in a municipality where they offer aggregated data. So let me explain that for a minute. So you might have a commercial office building, say in Chicago, where you have 50 tenants, but the utility ComEd will release an aggregated number of what that whole building used. So it won't show you tenant by tenant, but it will say this address, 211 West Wacker, used this much energy collectively, and that's perfect for benchmarking. But you have a triple net industrial asset or a strip mall, then it becomes really hard because you have to go convince individual tenants or triple net tenants that you need their data for benchmarking because you're the building owner and the landlord, and then they say, well, you're my landlord, I'm not sharing my account information with you. Or we sat with a client yesterday where Apple is a tenant of theirs, and Apple says, you know what, we'd rather pay the fine that, quite frankly, than share this information because we don't want it to be used against us. Maybe it would come out that we use too much energy or not enough, or we're not using it in the right way, or some negative PR associated with it. So if the fine is $100 or something, we're just going to pay it. So there's different attitudes and different challenges that come in. And then, of course, one of the benefits is just getting visibility into your portfolio. And that's really the purpose of benchmarking, is to have a look and really see who are your top performers when normalized across the board by asset class and size and vintage and all of that. Who are my bottom performers? If I do have some time and effort and dollars to focus on energy efficiency initiatives, where will I focus it? So it helps you start, answering those questions. So how can we help? There's one self-serving slide in here. Here it is, but we can help. So from various aspects, we can help you plan a strategy and say, okay, I have 1,300 assets. How do I even begin to bite that off and do something about it? How do I even make a comprehensive plan? How do I spend my dollars wisely? How are we going to continue to move the needle each year? So say we've been reporting or doing this benchmarking thing now for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. How do we show continuous improvement? And then just the sheer heavy lift, which is kind of Gobi special sauce, is how do I get all this data? So we talked about it's difficult, right? You have to extract utility level data from all these properties, then you have to compile it, normalize it, get it into the portfolio manager system by a certain deadline. So that's something that between our technology and consulting group, we can certainly help with. And then the outputs, if you look down the right-hand side, are not just Energy Star Portfolio Manager for benchmarking, but other things like GRES and SASB and CDP and LEED, because a lot of the data that we're collecting for benchmarking, there's a lot of overlap. So like just as an example, GRES and CDP overlap about 75% as far as inputs, because they're all going back to similar building attributes, energy, water, waste, that type of thing. So once it's in the Gobi system and into our software, the outputs become a lot easier, and you don't end up inputting the same data into redundant systems and wasting a bunch of time. And then, I promised just one shameless plug, but there were two. There's two. So here's the other one. We're really, really good at Energy Star. So we're recognized every year by the US EPA. Started off just by getting Partner of the Year, and then the last couple of years have been awarded with Sustained Excellence, which is a high honor for us. We do tons of these, and we're recognized as one of the leading providers for Energy Star. And the way that Energy Star, just again to be simple for folks who are new to this all, Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the system of record that a lot of the municipalities, almost all of them, if not all of them, use for benchmarking. It's just kind of the standard system that's used. Once your data is in there for purposes of mandatory benchmarking, then of course you have the opportunity to actually submit for the Energy Star Award. So I mentioned, here's the numbers behind those accolades and awards, is that we just do a ton of this stuff. So the benchmarking is a standalone. Energy Star is additional, but there's accolades that are associated with getting Energy Star, and Neil will talk a little bit about that. And as I mentioned, there's between 20 and 30 active benchmarking municipalities at the moment, and we've done submissions on behalf of all of them. So to boil it down, so benchmarking is mandatory, right? So now you have the province that's saying you have to do it. Different reactions to that. Some folks say, well, why? Why are you watching me? It's Big Brother. Some folks embrace it and say, this is great. I totally understand the spirit of why we're doing this benchmarking. I'm on board. This is going to be wonderful. So we want to talk a little bit about just beyond benchmarking. So you've completed the mandatory requirements, but what else can it help you do? Once you have all of your properties in a system like Energy Star Portfolio Manager for purposes of benchmarking because you have to, the good part about that is you can start to, as I mentioned before, rank buildings, identify opportunities. So you say, all right, of my 100 buildings, these are my top 10 guzzlers, or bottom 10 guzzlers, and my top 10 performers. What am I doing? What are the best practices I'm doing at my top 10 performers that I could perhaps disseminate throughout the portfolio? Or if I only have a certain amount of budget, time, effort to focus on energy initiatives this year, maybe I'm only looking at that bottom 10%. I'm going to leave the other ones alone. So measuring efficiency, seeing where everything is at. And then all of this, directly or indirectly does drive NOI and increase the asset value. If assets are performing better, they're more attractive to investors, to tenants, and I think there's plenty of data to support that. This one's just meant to show a correlation, again, between city benchmarking and Energy Star. So still a lot more Energy Star voluntary. Energy Star is a voluntary program. It's a voluntary award that you can get. It's still surpassing, the amount of city benchmarking, but that's catching up, right? So where the mandatory comes along with the voluntary and where those two are going to intersect will be interesting to see. And then a case study. So I did mention the folks that say like, why do we have to do this? This is ridiculous. The city's saying. So my friend Jim here, maybe he's listening, maybe he isn't. But, that was kind of their attitude. So this is not a Class A+ office operator. They're in Chicago. They kind of have a different thesis than, Class A+ buildings that want to be LEED Platinum and Energy Star and all that. And they got hit by the Chicago ordinance, so got a bunch of notices that they had to comply and report, disclose their energy, called us up and said, what's the bare minimum we have to do to get this done? This is a racket. And we said, okay, we'll do the bare minimum for your downtown Chicago portfolio. And then they saw such benefits from the program, from benchmarking, from having, paying attention to energy and sustainability because they were forced to, that they electively put in their suburban portfolio that was not ordinance affected because of the benefits that they saw, with the mandatory, the properties that had to disclose. So, a fairy tale, if there ever was one in the Gobi world, that's our little fairy tale with a happy ending. But good things can happen, and it's for all types of, asset classes and operators. And not to mention the savings. Actually save cold, hard cash. It's always a great benefit above and beyond the altruistic, feel-good nature of benchmarking. So, yes, before Gobi, they really weren't paying attention to this. They didn't have an accurate tool to measure and capture their savings, the results of any of their efficiency projects. They would do them. They weren't certain about the returns. They couldn't communicate the efficacy of the project. So the Gobi system software plus, the consultants that we have in-house identify and prioritize opportunities. So go about it in kind of a systematic, methodical way, earn building recognitions like Energy Stars, or the City of Chicago actually featured this particular client as a case study in their own report on benchmarking. Just transparency, and that's huge. That drives improvements in performance, because all of a sudden if you rank all your properties and you throw out to the property managers publicly, here are the top ranking properties and here are the bottom ranking ones, just by human nature, no one wants to be the last one or the last five. It's embarrassing. So they're going to do things to start to tighten it up, all of a sudden, and all you did was provide the transparency. You did nothing else except, publicly shaming people, which tends to be effective. And then hours of manual work saved. So again, we talked about the do-it-yourself method, totally an option, but think about, property managers or people on the sustainability team keying in utility data, perhaps cat fingering something, typing an extra zero, taking time away from leasing activities or tenants or whatever it may be. So save that manual work. And then, of course, comply with the city ordinance, streamline that. So, and then last, kind of note on this particular client that we're highlighting as a case study. So they've also increased their voluntary Energy Star awards, which is something that they celebrate and they're proud of within their organization. And again, kind of just a result of mandatory benchmarking. Started off with mandatory benchmarking, but now they have a whole program that they're really proud of, that really went beyond, the mandatory requirements. All right, so with that, Neil's going to talk about how all this connects into GRES and affects GRES, which a lot of folks in the line think are participating in. So Neil, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Awesome. Thanks so much. That's a great summary, and it sounds like a great case study of a success there. So welcome everybody. I'm Neil Pagram. I'm representing GRES, which is the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. One of the things that we have is a perspective on benchmarking at a global level, obviously. And so while Ontario is taking steps forward on this, and it's been mentioned that this is kind of percolating all across North America, in other markets such as Europe and Australia, benchmarking and these types of programs have been going on for many years. So we pull data on a global aspects, and that allows us to be able to kind of get a bit of a higher level perspective on this. We also are much more focused on portfolios rather than on individual assets. So that kind of has a unique perspective. So our overall mission here is about enhancing and protecting shareholder value by assessing and empowering sustainability practices in the real estate sector. And so what I wanted to talk about today is just, what's this all about and how market behavior has shifted. So this perhaps doesn't really matter whether we're in any industry, real estate specific or anything. We all know that if you want to move a market in a direction, you've got the leaders on one side and you're trying to support and encourage them, and you've got regulation on the other. And basically what's happened in Ontario is maybe 5 years ago, a lot of the leaders were already doing some type of benchmarking. They were tracking performance. They were working with companies like Gobi to look at performance at an individual asset. And now what's come along is the regulation side. So that kind of catches everybody, and it becomes best practices or compliance. And so this has already happened at a per property level, and we know this as kind of green building certificates. So we all know about LEED certifications. In Canada, BOMA is big, and I know POMA now has connections with Energy Star. And so you can see Energy Star is listed there too. And historically, we've been saying, okay, well, let's move individual assets, individual buildings forward on the kind of sustainability performance front by using certifications. And regulation would be considered code in this. You still have to meet up with some type of municipal code or government codes wherever you are. So your buildings are basically just safe and operated that way. And this is also an economic signal. So investors are putting the money and time behind this because they think there's a direct correlation with value for that property. So what GRESB is looking at is kind of this on a portfolio level, and we look at it from an investor perspective. So we have all these private equity funds, or we have REITs or JVs, and they want to know how their assets or their portfolios around the world are moving. So we have a star and a rating system. And overall, we're trying to move whole portfolios towards the right, just like an individual asset would do that way. And for us, it's kind of catching that engagement and pushing the whole thing over that way. So, you know, maybe you don't know tons about our work, and if you get a bit of a background on it here, we started in 2009, so our first kind of assessment data is in 2010, and at that time we had 198 entities submit data globally, and we were excited that last year we peaked at 850. That includes publicly traded ones, private equity funds, and all kinds of different properties from around the world. As you can see, we have 77,000 assets now from 62 countries in there, and $3.7 trillion in GAV covered in that. So we get a whole bunch of different assets. They come from all different regions, and a lot of that data now is being pushed because of benchmarking in, let's say, a state level or a province level or a country level, that's pushing organizations to make sure that they're tracking energy or waste or water performance in their properties. So let's see what this looks like if I can move the slide. Oh, the slide's moving on me here. Seem to have lost control for some reason. Oh, there it goes. So let's talk about precise energy data coverage. So really, one of the numbers I wanted to show here is about in Europe, and I do have some numbers for North America, but I thought it would be good to kind of bring into perspective what's going on in other markets. So right now, we get energy data coverage, and we have about 57% of members provide us really precise energy data coverage for Europe. And so it allows us to kind of look at these benchmarking data. I think somebody else is moving the cursor, so if we can just give me control again, that'd be great. Oh, there it goes. So this is actually in meters squared, so not feet. And if, you know, it's got to do a little bit of a calculation. So these numbers would seem terrible if we were doing this in per square foot. But from an intensity per kilowatt hour per meter, we start to get these average intensities for different asset types from around the world. So this also is a key thing to remember with the Ontario benchmarking, is that you're not going to compare an office building to an industrial building. You're not doing residential to hotel. Every one of them has a unique perspective on this, and they have different usage and different tenant needs, and obviously different space. So if you just look at the office one, you can see here that North America, we're kind of lagging behind on this, and the average office for North America in the GRESB survey kind of ends up being a much higher kilowatt hour per meter squared than is the average for Europe or Australia and New Zealand. So this is the kind of data that we can get at a global perspective, and as I said, it all flows in from the individual perspectives of companies, let's say in Ontario. So how does this data all get into GRESB? Well, we hope that property management companies will submit it into us, particularly private companies do it in their own way, but we also want to make sure we get public data because those REITs have investors also, and they, you know, we want to capture that too. The data goes in and there's a validation system, so we want to make sure it's accurate. We want to make sure that you're doing it in square feet or meters and that it's not miscalculating things. Then we have a very detailed and objective scoring system that ranks that data and gives you a benchmark report. And that pure benchmarking comes out, so not only can you say, here's our data from a global perspective, but you can compare your results against, let's say, another portfolio of office assets that are in your region. So that gives you that pure benchmarking, very similar to how the requirements are going on in Ontario. But our data is not just about the asset level, but it's full ESG information. So it includes things about stakeholder engagement, so tenant engagement or something like that, and also about governance, things such as what your strategy is, and other aspects of what would be considered full sustainability. So we don't only do property level data. And to keep this in mind here is we do give about 28% of our GRESB score is on the management and policy aspect of things. So what are your plans, policies, governance? How are you accountable for sustainability performance and ESG performance? But actually 72% of your GRESB score is about the implementation and measurement. And actually a relatively small amount is on whether you actually did a year over year great performance. So even if you have a lot of data, and you have great coverage of your assets, and so you've got good energy and water data from all of your assets across your portfolios, you can do very well in the GRESB score, even if your assets didn't perform super well this year. So it's not just about getting scoring for doing great performance, whereas some certification programs, it's all about your energy performance. So good thing to keep in mind. So this all results in you getting a scorecard and getting a benchmark report. This is a screenshot of some of our scorecards where you can see you get information about how you perform against your peers. You get insight information about what are other people in your region doing and how your scores compare to them. And this is where we think the real value is. So you become a GRES member, you submit your data, you submit information about your policies and procedures. We give you a benchmark report back, which you can see how you're performing, and hopefully a detailed scorecard on that gives you information so you can prioritize your initiatives, not just at a building level, but also at a portfolio level and on other social and governance aspects too. And the last slide here is a bit complicated, but the overall takeaway is that on the left, everybody's got ESG data. You know, you've got performance data, you got a little waste can there and everything. On the right is getting this aggregated portfolio level. So remember that GRESB is driven from an investor perspective, and we want to make sure we're getting information to their level so they can give direct feedback and also can look at overall asset data. And today's discussion is about how you get this data in there. So we have these APIs with GRESB data partners such as Gobi. So you can pull your data straight out of Energy Star using them or other tools. And this allows you to kind of roll that individual asset level, you know, those 12 months of bills up into our portal and get benchmarking from a global perspective on your assets. So yeah, so that's the overall perspective on us, and I'm here also to take some calls or some questions after, and I think that's my last slide.
Okay, great. So I have a couple questions for you know, the folks that we have on the line, just given the wealth of knowledge and you know, experience. I'm trying to see if I can, I don't know if I have control now to advance the slide. Okay, well, it's just a nice visual anyways to look at while we discuss. So a couple questions for you guys. So Neil, you know, you spent time in your past life in the sustainability group for Morgard and Rob for Minto, as we mentioned, many years and different initiatives and successes and programs and whatnot. So how, for, you know, wearing that hat for a minute, did you at the time feel the need for something like this benchmarking ordinance to come forward? Were you kind of anxiously waiting for it, anticipating it, or more dreading it? You know, what's your take on that kind of in your previous life?
Rob, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I can start. So, you know, I'm anxiously waiting for it in the market. What we found, you know, with Minto back in 2009, we created our first environmental footprint report just on energy and water use and waste across both our existing and new build portfolio. What it did is allow us to set targets so we can, you know, generate some energy and water reduction measures and, you know, get asset management on board. But also what it did is it confirmed all the energy measurement, the performance of all the measures moving forward. But what we found, you know, it was great for marketing and brand as us as a green company. But we found others weren't doing it. So on a competitive market, say in the rental community, it was still a challenge for us. So I think this is a very positive thing for the province of Ontario to move forward with this ordinance.
Yeah, I echo your points. And, you know, when I was in that previous role, we started kind of in the 2009 range earlier. And if you think about that kind of market transformation graph, you're always going to have some large leading companies who are pushing on this and who, for their own internal reasons, want to look at performance. And then you've kind of got the laggards out the back who are getting caught by regulation and just trying to do best practices or code. So there's lots of companies out there who've been looking at this for a long time, and also some leading regions around the world who've been looking at it. For us, it was, or for them, it was a lot that performance level, as mentioned. It was also a good way to get kind of normalization data. So there's weather normalization access in Energy Star, and you can, you know, get regionalization information in there too. And it's all about the market transformation too. I think overall organizations are excited about it because it gives them a wider range of information about the portfolio, and as opposed to trying to benchmark internally, you actually get this outward looking information. So if you don't have thousands of assets, it's hard to tell whether your buildings are doing well against the overall average. So maybe you have an asset that's been doing great year over year, and you're like, wow, we did great. We're saving 3% each year or 5% this year, but you don't even realize that actually at an intensity level compared to other buildings in the same region, in the same city, in the same asset type, it's already, only performing at 50% of what the other ones are. So there's to understand performance, you need to understand both year over year information, but you also need to just understand how it compares to benchmark data sets against similar like for like buildings. So yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think, certainly organizations that designate a person to be the head of sustainability or have sustainability teams probably have the right outlook and mindset towards this anyways, versus some of the naysayers that, let's say early naysayers who become adopters and supporters eventually, like the folks that we talked about. So I think you guys touched upon this a little bit, but how do you foresee this helping, already mature sustainability programs, both at, the organizations that you guys left, but also for other folks on the line that might have pretty robust programs? How do you see this enhancing, if there's anything else to add? Like I said, I think, Neil, you kind of nailed it already, but and we talked about it a bit with the slides, but anything else that this particular mandatory ordinance will help boost sustainability programs that already exist, or give them kind of a different flavor, or spice it up a little bit?
I think I touched on a few of those concepts, but anytime you can have information that shows how the investor community and also the industry and regulators and the government is also interested in this, that can give you ammunition as a sustainability champion to go to your management team or go to your asset management team and show how what you're doing is best practices and leading. And so sometimes you just need help like that from a sustainability perspective. That I think just always helps. It's like when I think about the health and safety department, sometimes in a company, they have a very similar reasons to do health and safety, but a lot of the time what people are doing is just pure old, legal compliance and regulatory compliance. So at least you catch everybody doing that. And when in doubt, you can always fall back on saying, well, we have to do it. It's regulated to do it. Not the most inspiring reason to get every company on board, but I think that's the benefit of programs like this, is that we start to capture those companies too.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a really good point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
No, I was going to say I totally agree. My past life, driving sustainability programs, the internal battles were sometimes more challenging than the external battles. So totally agree with Neil on all his points there.
But from a broader, this is Bala here. From a broader sector perspective, those who are already having such programs at whatever stage, or subscribing to GRESB or LEED or GOMADAS or what have you, they're already, well ahead. I think one of the biggest impact of this regulation would be the rest, which forms the majority. If you look at the entire building stock in Ontario, is how do we get those, let's call it underperforming or average performing buildings to a level where they not only see the environmental benefit, but also actually, savings in the operational cost. That's a bit more of a motivator for somebody who's on the, let's say, the lower threshold of the regulation, size regulation, to kind of get, how do you get them, somebody who hasn't done anything for, last number of years, to kind of, get them motivated and do something. And regulation is, as in some ways, it's a good motivator to be compliant. So they will definitely see the benefit long term.
Yeah, and I think we should congratulate the certification programs out there and industry groups that are aligning with kind of these types of benchmarking programs and going on, in the U.S. and groups like BOMA in Canada, where they're saying, well, we don't have to have another thing to enter data in. If this is what everybody's using, to benchmark, then we can partner in with this too. And most people on this call have been in this long enough to remember that, it wasn't too long ago where we were just debating about which tools to use. So, it's come to NRCan also for saying, here's a consistent tool, here's what we can use. And, we all have our pros and cons of Energy Star. Sometimes it's not detailed enough, and sometimes it's too general. but it does set a easy accessible, free accessible tool for everybody to use, that then we have a consistent way of getting data and gets us closer to that. And then data from that can flow into programs like BOMA, or flow into Gobi, or flow into GRESB, or other things like that. And we kind of end up getting a central information for that, because 10 years ago it was a total mess, and we really have taken huge steps forward. So
that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just from my standpoint, you know, if anyone cares about the lonely service provider, what you said early on about these programs kind of giving what we do some teeth. So, you know, we're a business, we want to stay in business, and if we're just a bunch of tree huggers that are trying to save the world, unfortunately, sometimes that's not enough. You know, we're kind of a nice to have, not a need to have. But when there's policy around it, as you mentioned, it just gives what we do legitimacy and stickiness and teeth, and it, you know, makes us more confident, and certainly our investors more confident with what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, all right. So another question. And Bala, feel free to chime in too, though these are kind of directed towards Neil and Rob. So Minto's all multifamily res, condos, and Morguard is properties across all asset types and disciplines. So what do you guys think about, you know, which asset classes are the hardest to benchmark, and why do you think that is? I'd be interested to see if it's if you agree with what we find, you know, working on behalf of folks like you, as if we were to rank the most difficult versus the easiest asset classes to get this data for and report without holes.
Sure, Rob, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I'll start. Yeah, Minto does have some commercial, but they are predominantly multi-res and condo builders. But you know, where it is a bit of biggest challenge around the asset class would be under the multifamily res. You know, on the commercial side, usually, you know, a commercial property manager knows what his utility costs are. You know, he has a meter in place. A lot of commercial buildings, especially the newer assets, have some meters throughout the building or complex. You know, in a larger team, where multi-res, a lot of times it's a very small office. It could be a property manager and a property administrator who's also responsible for work orders and utility bills. So there's no one that's really tracking it. A lot of the work is in the old way, just put on Excel spreadsheets. So that is a bit of a challenge. So, but now, you know, like back in 2009, when we started Environmental Footprint Report, it was a huge challenge to get all the data information for the existing multi-res portfolio and dumping into an Excel spreadsheet. It was a full-time job for one individual. But with tools such as what Gobi provides today, now everything is automated, and they can take that huge workload off that one individual in a property management office in a multi-res and streamline it and provide the benchmarking for them.
Yeah, those are good points for sure. I think, you know, when you think about all the different building types out there, obviously the really unique ones, you know, let's say some type of, you know, healthcare or something like that gets really challenging. But even within the classic big ones, I think you have to ask whether, is it challenging because that property type is really unique and each one of those buildings is very unique, so therefore actually benchmarking is challenging because comparability is challenging, or is it just a challenge of getting the data? So for instance, commercial office has both of those factors that working for it. You know, really a big office tower that's a giant square box, it's very similar usage. So you can compare them, and you can compare them globally. So at a GRESB perspective, you know, whether we have an office tower in Sydney or London or Toronto, we can normalize for weather in theory, but also really they're not that much different usage, and they're very similar shape. But when you look at enclosed shopping centers, then you have a real challenge, because every single mall is a totally different structure and shape, has very different usage, has different leasing. Maybe it's got a whole bunch of different rooftop units as opposed to one central system. So we found, and I've always kind of thought that the shopping center benchmarking is really challenging. Whereas on the data side, that's a challenge when you have a triple net lease situation like an industrial. A lot of industrial facilities, like let's say warehouse, are actually quite similar in physical aspects, but getting the data from that tenant is quite challenging. So that's another thing I think is the forefront of this, is that the leading companies out there are making partnerships, whether it's through green leasing or through the utility, to get quality data out of properties where they have a leasing structure where they traditionally haven't been able to share that. So yeah, so when you ask, you know, what are the most challenging ones, I think it comes down to whether it's unique for benchmarking versus whether it's challenging for getting data. So
This is Vala here. I think you said it right. We find that the biggest thing is the data. One, if you're looking from the utility side, not very many utilities are equipped to handle the the request for aggregated data. As you know, many of the buildings where you may have tenants who are metered or pay their utility bills directly to the local utilities, where the landlord would not have any visibility on what the consumption is like. So from a challenge, from a broader benchmarking perspective, we need to make sure just we don't end up comparing apples to oranges. So getting the aggregated bill consumption data for that entire building is very critical. But right now, many of the utilities don't have the capability to do that. So I cite that as a bigger problem. And then the other part is the way the lease is structured, and then the complexity of the business itself. For example, the retail will be a lot more complex than an office building, relatively speaking, because especially if it's a closed asset type like mall, you have the individuals metered separately, and where the landlord could only make effect on the common area. So again, to be able to compare properly or benchmark properly, we need to make sure that all the data is easily available, and it's not always the case.
Yep, makes sense. And what do you guys think is kind of the future of benchmarking? So I'd say it's picked up now. Like I think to Neil's point, the early adopters have happened, and we're definitely not quite in the laggard phase, but definitely in the meat of benchmarking policy. And I always wonder if they're going to continue to be grassroots, where each municipality kind of has to build their own, or if there's going to be some sort of standardization across the board. And then what does the benchmarking or mandatory benchmarking landscape look like 8 years from now, 10 years from now? Is it kind of plateau, or is it going to become more stringent, or is it just going to become business as usual and go away? Or so what do you guys think? I mean, maybe your crystal ball is better than mine, but what are your thoughts on kind of the future of benchmarking, maybe 5-10 years out?
If I may take a stab out of that question. Making it more stringent doesn't necessarily make it more effective. I think it needs to be that some level of practicality must be considered there. But we are definitely, as BOMA, we are definitely not for various municipalities taking on benchmarking and reporting on their own, because our members, whether you look at Ontario or nationally, there needs to be a high degree of consistency. Therefore, we would always rely on the province or nationally to make sure that the whatever the program that's going to take place will be consistent across Canada and Ontario.
Got it. And Rob, Neil, any thoughts on that? Or
well, I just think with our federal government setting such lofty targets around greenhouse gas emission reductions and everything else, I think benchmarking is going to be a requirement, because I can't see us hitting those targets that have been set out for everyone unless you do some benchmarking. So, building owners and developers can identify opportunities to reduce their emissions. So I don't know if it'll be more stringent, but I think it may even be mandated.
Yeah, that kind of ties into, my next thought. So the Canadian government's committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050, and this is from a baseline of 2005 levels. So do you feel that we're on track, or that the Canadian building set is on track to do this and to achieve this lofty goal? So again, 40% by 2030, 80% by 2050, and will programs like EWRB be enough? Or do you think that the real estate industry has to voluntarily do more, or there has to be more regulation? Or how do you guys feel about being on pace to achieve that goal?
Who's taking that question? That's a fun one.
Oh, go ahead, Neil. Thank you for that.
Dang. Well, I mean, it ties to your other question. I mean, clearly in 5 years, all this data is going to be on some kind of magic blockchain, and then we're going to have a green button and it's all going to flow through and we're going to have perfect data and the internet's going to take over everything, right? So it should be pretty easy to collect all this data by then. I guess my perspective on, kind of tied to the question just before too, is that I was always surprised when you think about the range of performance information and just kind of policy and procedures that you have when you think about what we talk about when we consider all the built environment, and not even from a GRESB global perspective, but even in Ontario, there's flagship, bank assets in the downtown core of Ontario or Toronto or something like that, where you've got incredible metering, you've got by floor meter, you got plug load metering, you've got that level. And then there's strip malls in other regions that don't even really use the municipal recycling system. So getting quality data is actually of the entire built environment is an incredibly huge task. Tying that into actually tracking all the emission reductions, I'd love to believe that we're on the way. My personal gut is I think we've got lots of things to do, and hopefully it ties to all these other sectors too. Real estate's challenging because of the split incentive with tenants and owners to make changes, but I think we've made lots of strides forward in that in the last 5 or 10 years, and hopefully we're moving forward for sure.
Yeah, I say this kind of tongue in cheek, and if anyone knows my personality, don't take it personally, but I always wonder if these goals that are far out are set by someone who's like, yes, by the year 2030, I shall retire in 2029, and
right.
by the year 2030, we'll have the 80% reductions.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're just stuck between goals that there's only so much the planet can take and the environment can take, and then there's how much we all are willing to move. I think, the GRESB industry concept too is about looking at this at a portfolio level and really getting the investor community involved. I've always been kind of a big fan of the follow the money concept of the world too. So it's great. We have so many building operators out there who work super hard to get their green building certifications, and they have a list of things they'd love to do on their properties. They would love to kind of reglaze. They would love to do all this. They could spend all day telling you how they'd love to make their building more efficient. But are the tenants engaged on that? And does the investor actually also want to put the money in there to actually make that change? Are we giving them the tools on evaluations or on cap rates and all those other things to try to actually make that change? That's a much bigger challenge. So, but I think the industry has made huge strides forward. So.
All right, we're coming up on time here, but there was one question that I wanted to get through. Let's see. So it's a numbers question. I think, Bala, your slide touched on some metrics, and maybe you know offhand, but someone's wondering, what is the estimated total square footage of the buildings that are affected by this ordinance? And I don't know, again, specifically this person didn't ask like in year 1 or year 2 or year 3 when it's kind of staggered based on square footage and size, but I think maybe looking for a rough order of magnitude of buildings that will be affected. I don't know if that's a figure you know offhand.
We don't know the exact square footage, but it's about 118,000 buildings that are affected by this.
Okay.
Yeah, in Ontario, so it's still quite a substantial amount.
Hopefully for the person on the line, that gives you kind of an idea, and if you want to dig into that more, I'm happy to do a deeper dive and follow up on that and let you know. All right, so coming right up on the hour, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and really appreciate the folks that joined today, and certainly appreciate the expertise and knowledge from the folks on the phone. So thanks for joining us, and as I said, the recording will be available. I'm personally always available for any sorts of questions. I had a great teacher that once told me the only stupid question is the one that is not asked. So with that in mind, ask anything, everything. Our contact information is up on the screen right now. If there's any of us you want to get in touch with directly. And we look forward to talking with you guys soon and seeing the successful ordinance be implemented and start moving the needle. So thanks again. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye-bye.